Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network, home to Nerd Nuptial on a Monday, all the way through to Missing Frames on a Sunday, and so many other amazing shows in between. I would highly recommend this week's Missing Frames. It just dropped today, before midnight. John Mills has seen it for the first time, and it's great to hear his thoughts and analysis of one of my all-time favourite movies, so I highly recommend you check that out. But, as promised last week, I'm joined again by author, film writer and projectionist Dallas King. How are you today, Dallas?
I'm very well, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad at all. It's been a week since we last spoke about Duncan Jones, and it feels like so much has happened in between. And obviously for ourselves, we've been busy with the Glasgow Film Festival, so we'll be back again next week for that. But it seems an appropriate thing to continue our Duncan Jones series. So, last week we spoke about the first three movies that he's done, Moon, Source Code and Warcraft. And we touched a little bit about his new movie, Mute. But it's been a labour of love for Duncan Jones to bring this to the big screen, and kind of likewise for fans like us waiting for its release. So, kind of Dallas, what I want to ask before we kind of maybe dive into sort of the spoiler chat is, came out on Friday. How did you first watch it? What was your kind of experience? And kind of, without going into too much detail, what was your kind of initial reaction to it?
Well, my first watch of it was how I actually viewed it for the first time was actually not my initial preference for watching a film. I'd rather watch it either in a cinema or on a big screen, but because I wanted to see it as soon as possible, I ended up watching it in a Starbucks on my laptop during the 2 hours I had before I needed to start work. So that was my first introduction to Mute. What about yourself?
I think Christopher Nolan, if he listened to this podcast, we'd be honoured if he did. It was probably crying at hearing you describe how you first watched this sci-fi movie. I was going to watch it on Netflix, obviously, no other choice. It was showing in some cinemas in London, Sheffield and such like, nothing remotely close to where I am. So I watched on Netflix. I had to wait until the end of the working day. I was kind of like, oh, you know what, I'm going into work for 8 o'clock, I'll be finished back at 4, I'll get home, I'll go on a blackout so no news hits me about the movie. But I was having quite a quiet day at work, and naturally your fingers navigate towards playing around on Twitter and such like, and I became a bit conscious of some of the reviews and responses to the movie being a bit divisive. So that kind of was going into how I watched the movie for the first time. So I got home, drew the curtains, lights off, tried to make it as much of a cinema experience as possible, and that was kind of my first way of going into it. So even though I'd kind of managed to avoid everything but the trailers, so I kind of didn't know too much about the plot beyond what, that one sentence sort of structure about a guy who is mute looking for a lost lover in a futuristic techno Berlin. So there was a lot of surprises kind of going into that for me. So kind of, when you kind of were watching it in the Starbucks, I was just curious, what was that experience like watching a sci-fi movie on such a small phone?
I mean, it was an odd experience, but also, I mean, I was still fully engrossed in the film. I had my headphones on and everything, so I was able to sort of give it my full attention. I mean, it's certainly a film that I believe I need to see again, and on as big a screen as possible, if not a cinema screen, at least my 37-inch television back home, where I can give it, because I think it's something that will add something to it. By seeing it on a bigger screen, you'll be able to get a lot more of the details, and certainly appreciate more of the sort of, there's some fantastic production design and stuff, and a lot of the physical sets and stuff like that. So I think it's something that will benefit from a big screen experience. And I know what you were saying about the reviews and stuff like that, because basically as I was just sitting down to watch it, someone then decided to Facebook me a link to, I think it was Peter Bradshaw's review in The Guardian, and it was this like, ooh, review's great, but have you seen it? I said, I'm trying to watch it now, please leave me alone. And it was like, because I went back and read it afterwards, and I mean, that review was, I think, I just finished my review just now, and as Ronan Keating might have said, you say it, if you've got nothing nice to say, you say it best when you say nothing at all. I mean, some of these reviews are very harsh, but I mean, I certainly found a lot to admire and enjoy in Mute. What about yourself?
Yeah, obviously we kind of don't know too much about each other's opinions beyond I think I saw you tweet Duncan Jones that you quite enjoyed it. I had posted a gif of Malcolm Tucker where it wasn't meant to look as aggressive as it was, but I suppose that's his natural face, where it was kind of like that. It was a gif I picked where it was like the camera zoomed in and sort of like he's processing a lot of information and he's maybe not too sure if he liked it or not. And then I suppose I didn't watch the GIF all the way through, and then he like gnarls his teeth, looks like he's going to just like tear through someone. I was like, that's maybe not the impression that I wanted to give. I mean, as you kind of say, there's some of the reviews have come out, and I think Duncan Jones tweeted that he kind of felt some of the reviews have been a bit personal and a bit unfair. I mean, there's something we are used to with some people saying sometimes, well, it's film for fans and not the critics, but it seemed to have kind of hurt someone like Duncan Jones, I think, quite a bit, because we'll kind of obviously get into it. It's a very personal movie, and obviously it's been a passion project of his for a long time, and to see it kind of come out at last, and it's a bit of a tidal wave of criticism from the critics. I think last I checked on Rotten Tomatoes it was maybe 5%, something I don't put much kind of stock in myself, but it is quite a bit of a stark number on there. So, but I think it was like 69% or something for fan reaction, so that's something, I guess. But so it sounds like you were relatively quite happy with the movie then.
I mean, it is a flawed movie. I mean, I have slight issues, I think, with the main character of Leo. This isn't really sort of spoilery because it sort of all happens within the first 20 minutes, but the character himself he's grown up as Amish, and in the opening prologue he has an accident on a motorboat which basically slices his vocal cords, and his parents are given the option, that he can get surgery to repair this and he'd be able to speak again, but due to their Amish upbringing they decide against the surgery, and he is then forced to live the rest of his life as a mute. But then skip forward 20 years and he's in Berlin surrounded by technology, yet he's moved away from his families, but he still apparently remains strictly Amish in his use, his avoidance of technology. And I think there just could have maybe been a bit slightly more about sort of what led him to sort of leave the family and how he sort of functions day to day. If there'd been a little bit more built up with that, I think it would have gone a long way just to sort of getting a better idea of the character.
Yeah, Leo was a character that, as you say, we're kind of introduced to quite early on. He's our first sort of gateway to this techno-futuristic Blade Runner style world in Berlin, and I think for me I was starting to have that immediate problem that, when we think of sort of Duncan Jones movies, we've got Sam Bell, we've got Jake Gyllenhaal's character in Source Code. Even though I wasn't the biggest fan of Warcraft, that orc was someone that was quite, it's quite a nice guy, it's an interesting little story. He's just trying to be a good father. With Leo, was almost immediately like, I just couldn't get into this character, and I didn't feel that it was because he was mute. I just was struggling to get sort of anything from him. He wasn't projecting much, especially in the early part of the movie. I think it improved sort of as it went on, but he was a character I was almost not interested in. And I think when you meet sort of Paul Rudd's character, Cactus Bill, the problem sometimes is, I think with a lot of movies, is when you've got someone as charismatic as Paul Rudd, even in sort of a quite despicable role, you're immediately like, I want to stay with this character and not someone that was a bit sort of quiet, a bit potentially boring in my eyes. And I was always like, I want to get back to this Cactus Bill storyline. So that was always a bit of a struggle for me.
No, I think I'm in the same boat as you actually with that one. It was similar, like we were discussing, like with Warcraft, in that you had the sort of two storylines simultaneously. You had the orc who was trying to sort of protect his family in this new world and sort of going against the other orcs in terms of their idea of taking over this planet. And then you've got the human characters who are trying to basically protect their homeland and stuff like that. And for me, the orc storyline in the film was more interesting than the human one. And similarly in Mute, I was the same, that anytime we were away from sort of the characters of Cactus Bill and Duck, I immediately wanted to go back to them. And I think maybe with just a couple of tweaks, the storyline, I think you could have almost made Cactus Bill the lead character. And as I know, we were talking about sort of how Blade Runner was definitely a huge influence on the style and the look of the film. For me, I think Duncan Jones had mentioned Casablanca, and the futuristic Berlin in which we brought into in the movie does have a very sort of Casablanca feel, especially in the movie style, in that, you've got these people who are just sort of waiting around for something to happen. Cactus Bill's looking to get a couple of, exit visas so he can get back to the States with his daughter. Leo's looking for something in that he's trying to find the girlfriend that he loves who's disappeared and stuff like that. So it definitely had that sort of vibe. Did you sort of agree on that one?
Yeah. I mean, it was one of these few, as you were kind of touching on Casablanca, that had been something that had been kind of a little teased in sort of going forward, that this movie was going to be a little bit inspired by that. It wasn't just sort of Blade Runner. And I think you definitely sort of get that feeling about this. Everyone's sort of looking to escape. And I thought, and I liked that idea that it was sort of futuristic, but it was still very much in our sort of present, that we have this sort of futuristic Berlin, but really the outskirts of the city could just be, travelling up the A96 here or something like that. It felt very much still grounded in a reality that we could imagine. You had some flying cars, but some people could drive, and I think that's always a good thing with a period piece sometimes, is it's so easy sometimes to just throw everything out, to make everything futuristic. Everyone's wearing this way or acting that way. Whereas sometimes reality is that, people still wear flares in the 2000s. Is making sure that some of the visuals that you've got on, some of the backgrounds you've got are kind of still integrated into this modern world, because Moon is only sort of into the near future. This is only in our near future as well. And it keeps it all sort of grounded. It still keeps it a relatable world, I think.
Yeah, no, you've got because at some point, you've got the mixture of the flying cars, but you've also got some people who've got the classic cars. It's almost like a status symbol in that. And yeah, the sort of technological advances, I mean, you've got the mobile phones which have voice recognition and stuff, but a lot of it does feel quite plausible. And I kind of like the idea of these the flying drones that bring takeaways to your phone's location. I kind of like that idea, and I know it's sort of building on this real world thing that I know Amazon at one point are wanting to deliver things via drones. So it all feels very plausible. It doesn't feel like a future that couldn't exist, and that it's completely fiction. It's kind of based on fact in a similar way that Moon was as well.
Yeah. So obviously we've kind of skirted around some stuff. So would you like to dive into some spoiler territory?
I think we probably could now. Yes. Yeah. So a lot of the sort of technological advances within the film are powered by lunar industries, which is still very much on the go and on the scene in this film, and it looks like they haven't suffered too much fallback from the events of Moon, although they are directly referenced in one particular scene that appears on the television.
Yeah, I enjoyed that moment of seeing Sam Bell somewhat have an argument with Sam Bell in court, and it was almost one of these moments you get it for a few seconds on the screen, and then they start chatting away, and you hear it in the background. It's like, shut up, guys! I want to hear what's on the news. Everyone's being so dismissive of the news, and it's like, no, I want to watch the news. I was so excited to have this exciting little moment back in the Moon universe.
Yeah, I know, and it's the kind of thing that I would want to go back and rewatch a few times, because, like you say, they turn it off quite quickly. It's clearly been an ongoing story in the Mute universe. But because on the first time, I hardly even noticed that there was a third Sam Bell. There was two, and I'm trying to figure out if the one with the beard is the original Sam Bell, and they've got a few back down from the moon base, or I really want to kind of know what was happening. So I was trying to scan, there was newspapers and stuff featuring a couple of, so I was trying to read every single little bit to try and figure out and piece together the story, because I know there was a bit in the bowling alley where there's something mentioned that Gertie was hacked and has caused something as well. So there's a few different references to the ongoing Moon story as well.
Yeah, exactly. There'll definitely be someone out there that's screen capping away, and I've only had the chance to watch this once so far, and I'm sure that some of the references have just totally passed me by. But I'm desperate to watch it again, sort of with a bit of an eagle eye on those sorts of things. So, kind of one thing I'm curious about, sort of, it's kind of an open kind of forum now, is I'm curious to see what you kind of thought about. We'll kind of maybe go through the first three characters, and I'm sure we'll touch upon some of the plot threads there. So we kind of touched upon Cactus Bill and Duck, Cactus's partner and best friend in this whole thing. We obviously mentioned that we were we were very much interested in their storyline and their plot. What was it you liked about that characters or the storyline, or was there aspects that perhaps you weren't a fan of? Because there's certainly been a bit of criticism about a plot line with Duck where it seems to come out of a bit left field somewhat, that he is a paedophile, for example.
For me, I mean, I thought that up until that point, it's well plotted and hinted at that he's got a thing for, well, maybe not underage, but certainly sort of teenage girls and stuff like that, and living in this sort of world with easy access to brothels and stuff like that. It's something that as a man of power and influence and wealth, because he runs a very successful medical studio, he can get access to all this, and it's something that a lot of people will turn a blind eye to. But it's something that threatens to sort of cause a disruption in the friendship between Cactus Bill and Duck when Cactus Bill finds out that he's actually been recording this sort of stuff, and he basically tells him to stay away from his daughter. And it's, even though Cactus Bill does seem like a rather despicable character at times, he does have good qualities, which is why I was sort of saying that you could almost make it his story and sort of have a man trying to get back to America with his daughter, but his plans are disrupted by a vengeful ex in the form of a mute bartender.
Absolutely, yeah. Like, I found them they were such an odd kind of double act, and I think, as you were saying, it does take a wee while to sort of all to kind of click in and kind of plot away. And I thought, yeah, I don't know whether I necessarily liked the Duck character, not necessarily because of his kind of child abuse aspects, but I think it's a problem again that Paul Rudd is so charismatic, it's natural to gravitate towards him. And even when he's sort of in some despicable moments, I think you're like, oh yeah, this is an interesting character. But I think one moment, like we were saying, there's a scene where he confronts Duck, where he's seen this video where it clearly implies he's been filming these young girls, and I thought Paul Rudd was excellent in that. It was a realistic thing. It wasn't a screaming match or an abusive match. It was someone that was a friend that was just trying to break down his friend, get the honest truth out of him, and at the same time remind him, this is something that you can no longer do, and I'm going to make sure that happens. And I think that's something that will obviously come towards the end, where his actions in that moment will really sort of influence where he's going to end up.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's a great performance for me by Paul Rudd. There's been a lot of criticism of the film, but I don't think you can criticize Paul Rudd. I think his character sort of skirts perfectly the sort of dangerous aspect of it, and you could switch on a dime. It's like there's a great scene where they're in a shopping mall and a security guard confronts him about not paying for peanuts, and suddenly he just whips out a knife and then starts going at this guy, threatening he's going to cut out his eyes and stuff like that. And you actually feel that this guy could actually do it, and it's a testament to Rudd, because it's not really a role that I don't think we've really seen him in before on the big screen or small screen, depending on where you're watching your Netflix, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's sort of quite a unique role for him there, that we are used to him as sort of the easygoing guy, or he's had his edges here and there, but I think with this one it's certainly something quite brand new, a very much a killer, as it were. And it was he had this like nice little plot with his young daughter, just trying to get her back to America. I thought almost that was such a more interesting plot line than the kind of Leo's search for his missing girlfriend, that whether it was sort of the lack of communication or not, it was really difficult to get into that relationship. And I think things like that in the beginning, those early plotting moments, sort of really doomed his plot line.
Yeah, but I think sometimes it's like when you get like these old sort of film noir things from the 40s and stuff like that, sometimes the detective who's hired to do these things can seem a little on the sort of cold and bland side, and it's sometimes the supporting characters are the ones that sort of bring these movies to life. And I've seen sort of people talking about the characters such as Robert Sheehan's sort of prostitute, and Dominic Mohan's very sort of strange South African accent,
Oswald, yeah.
wearing a Japanese kimono sort of thing. But I mean, in all these sort of film noir things, you get witnesses and characters who just pop up for a scene or there, just basically in order to get information and stuff like that. So, in terms of like following that sort of film noir structure, I thought it did a very good job because. With the likes of even modern ones, like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, you've got a couple of different storylines going on, and it's only sort of towards the third act where the pieces of the puzzle all sort of finally fall into place, and that's when we come to the realization that Cactus Bill is actually closer to the storyline than we actually initially thought, perhaps.
Yeah, so we've kind of touched upon him a few times. What was your kind of reaction to sort of the Leo plot line that quite early on in the movie we lose him, he loses his girlfriend, Nadira, I think that's hopefully saying Nadira, yeah. What did you think of sort of that plot line? Because I think going into Mute, I find the idea of sort of a mute man kind of going through a city trying to find someone was going to be quite interesting. I think would have been quite an insight into communication and how people overcome sort of those disabilities. Did you feel that, were you excited about that plot going in? That was one of the few things we knew, or was it something that perhaps disappointed you a little bit?
No, I thought it was certainly on paper it sounded like a really interesting and novel concept of giving him another obstacle to overcome in the search for his girlfriend, that he couldn't talk, he could only communicate through writing things down on bits of paper or by using blunt force to intimidate people. The whole sort of Amish side sort of meaning that technologically wise he wasn't able to use that as an effective tool in finding someone, because I mean certainly these days being able to find someone who doesn't want to be found, you could do almost you've got some people who are basically able to pinpoint someone's position just by looking at tagging them on Instagram or something like that. So it was an interesting way to put sort of stumbling blocks and sort of hurdles in front of him, but I think ultimately there was just something sort of missing for me in the sort of character of Leo, that part of me sort of almost didn't really care if he found out what happened. It was always more about what was happening with the other characters, sadly.
What did you think of I didn't know this Amish part was going to be, part of Moon, really, when I was watching the movie. It was something I don't think it came out, or I managed to avoid it. It was quite a surprising sort of introduction, the idea of, we have this idea, we see all the cliches of the Amish people living in the countryside, living simple lives, and the idea of that clashing with, in a science fiction world was quite interesting. We've seen things like that kind of touched upon in Star Trek, not necessarily saying they're Amish, but sort of a space Amish people. Do you think that kind of blend of the Amish culture and technology worked, or was it just sort of a bit of an odd anomaly that this guy's Amish and he lives in futuristic Berlin?
Yeah, I think it's an idea that really could have worked, because it helps explain why he wouldn't be using the technology, but I think we needed to spend maybe some more time with him at an earlier age, or as an adult, living within that Amish community. Maybe even if it had been in the forms of flashbacks or something, just to sort of show why he was so adverse to using technology, even though he'd clearly moved away and moved into futuristic Berlin. So for me, there was just something in the past, or some sort of disconnect that just didn't sell the idea completely, I think, for me.
Yeah, it was something like, as well, it's like, oh, this is quite interesting, I'm willing to see where it goes, but it just became sort of just a bit of an oddity, really, that, or a sort of good way to say why, someone had lost their voice and kind of had resisted this sort of technology, that, I think the idea that his mother essentially rendered him kind of speechless, and through her lack of not being interested in sort of technology, was really quite interesting. And I think maybe something would work quite well if Mute was sort of an episodic television show, perhaps. But when with so many different ideas and themes, it's sort of the idea of this Amish upbringing seems to fall kind of through the wayside, and we sort of see him quite early on that he is embracing of certain technology. I know it's sort of like a very old phone, but he still uses something like that. I can't claim to be an expert on Amish culture, but he interacts with a lot of technology and computers, whether it's ordering his food or using it to help find his girl. It seemed something that was used, maybe jettisoned a little bit, but it was sort of there, and it just didn't seem to sort of settle down.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, on paper, if you look at it, it's like a set in a futuristic Berlin. Amish man looks like it's sort of almost combining two Harrison Ford films with Blade Runner and Witness. But I think, yeah, no, there's just something. I mean, you see him sort of sculpting things with the wood and using his hands and the more sort of traditional skills, which I believe come with the sort of Amish culture and the sort of the whole traditional barn raising and stuff like that. So he's sort of a mixture of sort of old and new world, and but yeah, I think there's just like I say, yeah, there's just a disconnect that just sort of didn't quite sort of sell it in the movie as well as it should have, I think.
One thing we've kind of spoke a little bit about was this sort of introduction with Duck's storyline of being sort of a kind of child offender. Did you think that was quite a brave idea, or did it maybe just sort of not fit in? How did you kind of feel about that one?
I think it was a brave choice to do. I think for me personally, I thought that sort of side of the storyline actually worked, and I thought Justin Theroux played it really well in the times that he looked in that conversation we're talking about with Paul Rudd. When Paul Rudd finds out what he is, he does sort of seem sort of guilty and remorseful of his actions and stuff like that. But then towards the end when Leo confronts Cactus Bill and they have a fight, and then you think that Cactus Bill is actually the most evil person in the movie, and then suddenly something happens. It turns out that actually no, it's not. It's actually Duck, who's probably the most evil, repellent character in the film, even though he didn't start off that way. But I know that Duncan Jones has spoken that the two characters were kind of inspired by a couple of the guys from MASH.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think just from sort of seeing a lot of Vietnam films growing up and stuff like that, such as Casualties at War and sort of Full Metal Jacket, is that certain men in those sort of situations unfortunately do sort of go down that road of these things are available to them, and I think it's probably just a comment on the sort of situation of war and stuff like that. And I mean, there is the fact that the Cactus Bill and Duck keep calling each other babe a lot, which is, it's almost like done in a jokey friend way, but it's sometimes you also think that maybe these guys have served together in the war, and perhaps maybe something else has happened between the two of them as well.
Yeah, it'd be quite interesting. I think, yeah, it was almost one of these ones, again, I just would have liked a little bit more about sort of their backstory and where they kind of came from. And they're just such an interesting pair and act, Justin Theroux and Paul Rudd. I'd pay to watch them in anything. It's definitely my favourite part of the movie. And yeah, I think you're definitely right with the sort of connections with MASH there. And I think we see it with a lot of modern war, whether it's in Afghanistan, Vietnam, these sorts of atrocities do happen, and I think whether that would have been a plot line that would have been included in if Mute was being made by, say, Warner Brothers or Paramount as opposed to Netflix, I'm not too sure, and I think that kind of maybe gives us a bit of an insight into the Netflix model, whether it is just like you get carte blanche to make what you want without sort of any studio notes, whether that's something that would have gone ahead, whether it was a mainstream movie or not. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I can see what you're saying. Yeah, no, I think as far as I'm aware, I mean, I think he's been able to make the film that he wanted to make without any sort of studio interference. So Netflix, I mean, for their part, are doing a good job of giving directors money to make films that they want to make, and it depends. Ultimately, depends if the audiences enjoy the films that these directors have made, but it's good that that they're at least getting the opportunity. I mean, because Duncan Jones has pretty much said that at the moment there was no other way to get this film made. I know he was talking at one point about a graphic novel being
I remember that one. Yeah,
I mean, certainly I would still like to see a graphic novel of this. It certainly could potentially like you say, maybe flesh out some of the backstory of characters. You could have a few chapters on that kind of thing, and I think that could be really quite interesting as well.
I'm curious as well. But what's your gut reaction? Would you like to have seen this movie perhaps go through perhaps the studio process with maybe the feedback from the studio, maybe sort of a bit of refinement there, or are you happy with the Netflix model perhaps where it's just like off you go, make whatever you want, and maybe what we're getting is something that is the best it could be, or it's something that could have benefited from perhaps a bit more involvement? What's your gut reaction with something like Mute?
I think I mean, I think I enjoyed it a lot more than some other people, but I think maybe because I don't know if it's interesting to know about the Netflix models and about how they go structuring about sort of feedback and reshoots and stuff like that. But for me, I thought there was still a lot to enjoy in the film, and I admire the fact that he went with such bold choices and stuff. Not all of them work, but I would always much rather watch a film that inspires sort of the Marmite style sort of love-hate relationship rather than a film that just comes out and you go
Yeah.
which you can with Netflix, that's sometimes the problem with Netflix. There's too many films on there to watch, and people will just start watching something and go and then just skip it and move on to something else. So something that provokes a reaction is always better than something that doesn't, I think.
Yeah, I'm quite fond of sort of maybe the Amazon kind of style project with where Amazon will invest will invest in movies, but they get the cinema release, they have some involvement and some notes, and I think that's I like that approach because I always feel maybe it sort of shows our privilege in a way here that we're lucky in a position that we can go whether with cinema cards or passes or press passes, we can see so many different movies. We get that cinema experience where for some people, and we've had this discussion kind of on the Nerd Party in other ways, where it's like, well, I can do that, but for some people that have got a kid, limited money, getting all these movies, whether it's Annihilation, this on Netflix, is like, well, I didn't have to go to the cinema. I can now see the movie. I can talk about the movie and enjoy it. And it's not just maybe the privileged few that get to see all these different style movies, and then we somewhere spend our money on sort of say the Marvel movies. So I think I can certainly appreciate the Netflix model there, but I always feel that especially like movies like Mute, they deserve to be seen on a big screen first, and then perhaps the Netflix comes a bit later on. That's my feeling and frustration.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I don't think there's any director out there who, if they got a Netflix only exclusive deal, would say that they had always envisioned their movie to be shown on a small screen or on an iPhone or something. They would want to see that on the big screen. Movies are made to be seen on the big screen, and I think it's going to be quite interesting with, like you said, Annihilation coming up, because that's just had a cinematic release in America, and the reviews have been very positive. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when the UK critics review it, because they might only be getting to see it, I'm presuming, on a Netflix screener, so they will be watching it on a small screen. So it'd be interesting to see what the disconnect between the reviews there is, because I'm presuming all the critics who watch Mute saw it on a small screen as well.
Yeah, I know one or two critics personally that watched it. Darren Mooney, who we had on here. Well, I suppose he'll be here on Wednesday, but we've already recorded that episode. He saw Mute, and I think due to the Netflix privacy, they were able to see it between 12 o'clock and 2 a.m. That was when he got to watch a screener copy of it. So that Netflix were very secretive about this movie, whether that was because they had maybe a negative feeling about it, or they just wanted to kind of keep it all in house. It's really hard for me to say. I mean, I always think of when sort of Netflix movies, when I think we were both at that screening of Okja at the Edinburgh Film Festival. You turn up to some of these critic screenings and it's all pretty quiet sometimes. You've got a few people there. Some people are just taking their notes. And I think that was one of the first times I've seen a press screening where it was absolutely rammed at 10 in the morning with everyone, whether it was press or industry. So, and I always think of that. That was one of my favourite movies of last year. But would I have liked it as much if I just watched it in a TV and on my home TV, as good as it was? And I'm just not too sure. I think that cinema experience really makes movies, especially when you've got filmmakers like Duncan Jones, and his name escapes me at the moment, but the guy behind Okja, and we've got Alex Garland with Annihilation. I want to see that on the big screen, and sometimes I will accept the compromise of perhaps someone not getting the full creative control to get that, because that will always be the number one experience and how I enjoy movies best.
No, I agree. I think movies are best viewed on a cinema screen, and some movies are best enjoyed in a full cinema with others. Some maybe not. It depends on the cinema audience, I guess, with the people. If it's an audience that absolutely are appreciating the film and i.e. not on their phones or making a load of noise and stuff like that, but I think they can be a wonderful experience to be, because I think when you see a film and you all start to realise that you're watching something special, I think it's just sort of a communal feeling that sort of comes up, and it just helps elevate the feeling that you get coming out of it.
And I think one thing as well, and I suppose this is a nice segue, that I think with you watch something on Netflix and you get the sound and audio as well, but nothing sometimes compares with the audio experience of watching something in the cinema. So this film reunited, I think I speak for both of us here, one of our favourite film composers, Clint Mansell, with Duncan Jones. What was your thoughts on Clint Mansell's score?
I really liked it. I mean, I was listening to it via headphones, and I think, yeah, like you say, I think is the sound quality will be the one thing that you miss from a cinema experience. Even if because I mean, if you can get a fantastic television at home, you can nearly recreate the visual experience of watching a film, but it's sometimes the sound is the thing that we'll lose. I mean, I've got a surround sound set up at home, so I'm looking forward to testing out the Clint Mansell score on that. But I thought it delivered a lot of atmosphere, and I think it worked very well in sort of balancing the new and old sort of style of Berlin as well.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good score by Clint Mansell. It wasn't. I suppose this is the challenge sometimes. The Moon score is one of my absolute all-time favourites. So I was somewhat maybe unfairly comparing it to that, where I was thinking, I'm just not having the same sort of connection with this one. Whereas perhaps I think, I need to let it settle. That I think in a week or two's time, once all the film festival stuff's out of the way and everything to go along with that's done and dusted, I'm going to dive back into the mute and try and listen to, the score maybe a bit more and pick up on some of those references that I've missed.
Yeah, no, I think it's something that will sort of become more powerful on repeat viewing. But I know what you mean. I think there wasn't maybe that sort of one standout track that in the ways to like Luxa Turner from Requiem for a Dream or Welcome to Lunar Industries from Moon. There maybe wasn't one particular standout moment, but I think in keeping with the film, I think it worked well in producing the appropriate atmosphere and emotion.
Yeah, and I think it's almost impossible not to think about music and think about sort of David Bowie. I mean, it's been always something that's somewhat annoyed me about when people discuss Duncan Jones or speak with him in interviews, is that it almost always comes up about him being related to David Bowie, that he's his son. And I get that; it's an interesting bit of nugget, but that's sort of enough. I don't need to hear about it when he's talking about Source Code or Warcraft or Moon or whatever. But with this, it's almost hard not to separate the two because, as we all know, it's one of his most personal movies. And I think for any fan of David Bowie, when they hear that his son is making a movie about set in Berlin, it's impossible not to draw connotations between David Bowie and his time in Berlin. There's certainly quite a few references to David Bowie in this movie, some that can be interpreted, some that are open to interpretation, some that are very obvious, and he obviously has his name kind of at the end of the credits as well, and Philip Glass's rendition of Heroes plays as well. What did you think of the David Bowie connections, and was this something you were expecting and kind of looking out for?
I knew not to expect any sort of direct references, so I certainly wasn't expecting to have any sort of David Bowie songs sort of blaring out on people's stereos or something like that. If nothing else, just to get more royalties and something, which is something admirably that he's avoided on previous films, not just looking to cash in. And because I'm presuming that he would have been able to get songs like that on, he would have just been going, Dad, would you be able to give me the rights for this track? And he went, yeah, I'm sure that's fine, okay, but yeah, no, it's not. But yeah, I mean, there's almost like a shadow hanging over the film being set in Berlin, that so much of his famous work came out of that time that he was there and Duncan's time there. But it's just reminded me of one of the standout musical moments of it, which was there's like a Nirvana cover of Heart-Shaped Box in there, which I thought was just stunning. And I was wondering, I need to find out if that was like Clint Mansell had reworked that one or whether it was a cover version, because I thought it was just a fantastic piece of music that fitted so well with what was happening at the time.
Yeah, I definitely need to find that out as well. I suppose that's always the difficulty about doing sort of podcast, mere 40 hours after we've watched something. Everything's very much in speculation. Look forward to our 10-year retrospective in a few years' time. I mean, I was quite surprised at how sort of on the nose some of it, and I don't mean that in a negative way, that some of these things were. I mean, the Berlin trilogy by David Bowie, Low, Heroes and Lodger. I mean, I never in a million years expected heroes to play at the end of the end credits. And I think when I see the Duncan Jones tweet about some of the criticism feels a bit personal and harsh. I think it's when you make something like this, you have a father that's one of the most creative and incredible individuals, and you make a film that is a tribute to him and something that Duncan Jones lived in Berlin. His father is synonymous with Berlin, and to have some of that negative criticism, it must be hard not to take personally. And I know some people are sounding off where it's like, well, typical filmmaker, has maybe made a film that split critics, and it's now like, oh, it's for the fans, not the critics. And I think sometimes it's like, well, yeah, you can be critical of a film, but if the guy just is feeling a bit upset and a bit raw, then that's okay, Just, we don't need to be all sanctimonious about someone being a bit disappointed and upset with a review, or two, being negative. And I feel for the guy. It's tough seeing, making a film and putting it out there, and to have, you mentioned the Guardian review, which is very scathing, and I think quite a few reviews have been really kind of gone to the jugular of the film. I think it's understandable to be upset, and I think with hopefully this discussion, we're certainly not saying it's the most amazing thing ever, it's the most terrible thing. I think you have to be fair, and I think it's easy to perhaps be a bit personal and negative. That's just my feeling personally.
Yeah, no, I think he said that with everything that was going on, he made the film for him almost as something that, he'd always wanted to do this. The opportunity was presented to himself, and he thought, yeah, you know what, I'm going to do it. And, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. I've made the film that I want to make. And, it's an admirable stance to take. And, there's a lot of people have tried to make films and have never managed to make them. So the fact that, that he's managed to make the film that he wants to make is fantastic. Yeah, not all of it works for me, but I mean, there's some fantastic moments and elements in there, and it's just great to see that he's out there making films. And I think it's one that will probably, get a bit of a reevaluation in time, and people will grow to love it. I mean, I'm sure when David Bowie was recording music and stuff like that, there were certain songs and albums that people didn't really appreciate first time round, and then give it a listen in a couple of years, and suddenly it's a masterpiece. And I think people are judging this film way too harshly just now, and I think it will get a bit more of the credit it deserves in later.
Yeah, like Lodger was the third album in the Bowie Berlin trilogy, and that certainly got some negative criticism as well. So it's certainly really well there. I mean, even one thing I would never in a million years of my life picked up on it, but Paul Rudd's knife is a Bowie knife. Which is a fighting knife, and I never in a million years would have known that. And it was created in the 19th century for someone called Jim Bowie, who became famous for using this knife. So it's little things like that I think the film is certainly peppered with. And obviously at the end as well, it mentions that and we spoke about it last week actually, that one of the people who basically raised Duncan Jones, this Scottish nanny, died mere days after David Bowie as well. So it's going to be interesting to see perhaps where he goes next. Warcraft was a very personal film. This was an incredibly personal film, whether with kind of working through probably a lot of the things he was feeling and dealing with, where he'll go next. And I'm really excited for wherever he goes next. I may not have perhaps been a fan of this outright, but he's still a filmmaker I'm so excited to see. And I hope that that he, it certainly seems to be a lot of people feeding back to him on Twitter, for example, that they're enjoying the movie, connecting with it, loving the characters, and that's exciting. I'm just only one person that may not have been a fan, but there's plenty of other people out there that are, and that's good. That's what people want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from what I've heard, hopefully the next film he'll do will be, he's looking to complete a threequel in the Mooniverse, and I believe it's centered around two female characters. So it'd be interesting to see, because there haven't been that many female characters in his films so far. So it'd be interesting to see what he can do with that. But I think it's. This is a Duncan Jones film. After all, there's so many sort of visual touches and sort of references, to his other films that you can just tell that it's his work. And it wasn't until sort of a sort of brief sort of going through and second viewing that I picked up on the Chesney Hawkes inclusion
Yes.
as a sort of soundtrack of a video game, which was, I thought, an inspired way to get it in there.
Yeah, so there was always going to be a way, and it's little things like that that I hope that people, when they rewatch this film or reevaluate it, there's certainly, as you say, so many little things to pick up on, whether you're a fan of him or not. That I think it's a deeply layered movie, and it's difficult sometimes when you do these podcasts or reviews. You're speaking after perhaps watching it one time, or certain things can influence how you were feeling that day. And I think with movies like Mute, and it's difficult. Here we are doing a podcast 2 days later. There's so much to mine, so much to fuel, and I think a movie like this, will benefit from repeat viewings and certain things that maybe I'm saying, well, I wasn't too sure about the Amish part. Maybe things like that become clearer in a second viewing or third viewing, or perhaps not. It's difficult. It's the trap of sometimes discussing movies, and we're certainly prone to failures. People's initial reactions can sometimes doom a film to negative criticism or not, but sometimes it's maybe give it a bit of time, and it's a challenge. It's certainly one we just have to kind of deal with here when we're making podcasts or reviews. But I hope I'm sure we'll both give it a repeat viewing, and I know if it came out on Blu-ray next week, we'd both buy it, even if we had it as a choice for free on Netflix.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'd buy it on Blu-ray, especially if there was a director's commentary, because I'd love to hear the sort of story behind it and the sort of the making of it and stuff like that. But I think, I know what you mean about this sort of, it's honestly, the race to be first out with the reviews and stuff like that. You've got all these people who need to, because you're given like the screening time, and then you've got a deadline for this. Your review has to be posted pretty much. I think the reviews basically hit just as it went up on Netflix.
Yeah,
so
I think it
people are
broke the
basically
embargo.
rushing around trying to type up a review and get it sent off. And yeah, I mean, I always try to do most of my reviews at least the day after or something like that, just to let it sort of percolate around in the mind a little bit just before. Because, there will be sometimes there'll be films that, you watch on the initial thing and you're like, oh, I don't really like that. But then you'll revisit them in a couple of years and actually go, actually, you know what, I was actually wrong. This is actually really good. Of course, now I'm struggling to, actually find one example to spring into my mind. But, do you have any like that?
I'm trying to think. You know what? I can think of one. Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou is one of my now all-time favourite Wes Anderson movies. I remember watching it the first time going, I'm not a fan of this. And I think, my always feeling is then there's always a pressure with something like this. We did a podcast last week where we were waxing lyrical about Duncan Jones. We can't wait for his new movie. We've waited for this for decades and stuff. And then you sit down and watch something, and it's difficult sometimes if you're a fan of a filmmaker, whether it's Duncan Jones, Wes Anderson, Paul Thomas Anderson, or you're a fan of a series, Star Wars. You go into these films sometimes, and the amount of pressure you put on that film and so much baggage you bring, and you wish you could just watch it in sort of a vacuum where it's like, just go in blind. You've thought about the trailers, you've thought about this for so long, and it adds an unfair pressure. I think Mute, for example, and Letterboxd, for example, and I saw so many people had watched that movie over the course of a weekend that I followed on it. Whether that would be something, and that's all kind of people with a pressure in it, because I think the type of people that are watching this opening weekend are someone that's invested in his career, his movie, or I would probably say fans of Moon, for example. So all these people are coming in with 10 years of baggage, 10 years of waiting for something, hyped up. Sometimes you think with a movie like this, would it have benefited from not knowing anything, whether we put our girlfriends or wives or friends down that had never had a thought in the world about it and got their reaction, whether that would have been different from the Guardian's writer or our reviews. It's so hard to tell sometimes.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, because there's certain films, because I don't think Mute actually has received a huge push on Netflix. It didn't receive as much coverage as, say, like the Cloverfield Paradox.
No.
Because
I only got a trailer about a month
I've always
ago.
been aware that Mute is coming because I follow Duncan Jones on Twitter, and I've been, I was basically tweeting Netflix every day during January asking for a date for when it was going to finally be released. So, I'm sort of one of the hardcore fans who was desperate to see it and saw opening day and stuff like that. But there's films on Netflix that I've seen, like Hush, which is like a horror film about a deaf woman who's terrorized by an intruder in her home, and I thought that was a fantastic film, which I hadn't really heard about, but I'd started to hear some good word of mouth from people on Twitter about, oh, you've got to check out this thing on Netflix. And I think it's that kind of thing that it will benefit from word of mouth going on. I think yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, is there anything else you want to mention about Mute, or are you desperate to go in off and have your second viewing of it?
Desperate to get a second viewing in this week, but I just love to know where Paul Rudd got most of his wardrobe, because I would wear those shirts all the time.
I know they were quite fabulous and fantastic, weren't they? So I'm sure there'll be somewhere out there. I mean, I God knows what they spent on his wardrobe, but it was worth every penny. And I thought the handlebar mustache was quite inspiring too.
That's something that I'm very jealous, because I just cannot grow a proper mustache, and I will never be able to get a real one as good as Paul Rudd's in that film.
I'm terrible. I looked on it with much jealousy. I mean, you can do your CGI this, CGI that. I mean, I thought it was a fantastic mustache, and thankfully no one had to spend 10 million covering that one in Avengers: Infinity War.
Yeah, no, he could loan that out, and he could have loaned that out to Henry Cavill if he hadn't had to shave it off, I think. So.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for joining me again for this one, Dal. So you will be back again next week, as we're both sort of watching a lot of films at the Glasgow Film Festival, and I think we've only watched one movie that we've both seen together, so I think we've seen a lot of different movies to each other, so I'm quite excited to compare notes on a few different movies next week with you. So that episode will be out again next Monday, so stay tuned again for that. Hopefully you're enjoying listening to Dallas as much as I am. I think he seems to be pretty much of a regular now, so he's got upgraded from guest star to special guest star. Next week it'll be and Dallas King at this rate, so thanks again.
No, don't put "and Dallas King," because if you ever see that on a movie poster, it normally means they die after 20 minutes.
That's true. Or we can maybe have you on the left-hand side, me on the right side, and I'll have my name at the left, yours at the right. We'll work something out.
I'm sure we will, yeah.
So we mentioned that you've written a review of Mute. We'll have that in the show notes. But where can people kind of find you online to hear your thoughts on Mute, read them, or kind of keep up to date with some of the films that you're watching?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at champcelluloid, and my film blog Championship Celluloid is on championshipcelluloid.blogspot.co.uk, and yeah, along with Mute, it'll have a bunch of reviews from the Glasgow Film Festival, hopefully coming up over the next week or so as well.
Excellent, yeah, I know. I think, when are you next back at the festival then, Dallas?
Down Thursday, Friday and Sunday, so the main one I'm looking to see is Ghost Stories, which I'm very excited about.
Ooh, exciting times. Well, I'm back again tomorrow, so I look forward to comparing our notes then. So thanks again for joining me, Dallas, and hopefully everyone out there, tell us your opinions of Mute, whether it's a bit of a Marmite movie for you, or you've watched it numerous times and it's a change your opinion, or just I'd love to hear what anyone thinks of Mute. Hopefully we'll get some exciting and some constructive thoughts. So thank you very much, everyone, and as you know, Dallas said it perfectly well. You say it best when you say nothing at all. Bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.